Halloween has always been one of my favorite nights. There is just that special feeling in the air, chillier than usual, with dry leaves crunching underfoot and decorations lining every street, making it feel as though the whole world has shifted slightly into something darker. It's a night when anything seems possible, and every shadow could be hiding something waiting to pop out at you. This year was no different. My friends Mike, Sarah, Ben, and I decided we didn't want to trick or treat anymore, so we just walked around the neighborhood, taking in the creepy vibes of it all. We weren't getting any more candy, but we loved just walking around, seeing all the kids running from house to house, filling their candy bags. We amused ourselves, laughed, enjoyed each other's company when we saw him. A clown. He stood at the far end of the street, illuminated hardly by a flickering streetlight. It was old, faded, not like the store-bought outfits the kids wore. No, this was something else. The pants were baggy, striped, and frayed at the edges. He had a big ruffled collar, the kind that looked like it was one Halloween night too many, and a face painted pure white with exaggerated red lips and a big nose. We froze in our steps. "Look at that," Mike said, squinting at the figure. "That's creepy, right?" Ben laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, probably just some guy trying to freak people out." We brushed it aside and kept walking, but no matter where we went, we kept catching glimpses of him. First, it was subtle, just a glimpse of him at a street corner, or standing at the end of the block, holding one bright red balloon. Anytime we turned, he was there, like he was waiting for us. He never chased us or tried to talk to us. Just stood there, always watching us. "This is getting weird," Sarah whispered, turning around as we turned down yet another street. The clown had reappeared, closer this time. "How's he doing that?" "He's quick," Mike muttered, quite unnerved. The streets were becoming quieter now. Most of the families with younger kids had gone home by this time, and only a few stragglers remained. The festive noise was fading, replaced by an eerie silence. We didn't know why we kept walking. Curiosity, fear, maybe both. "He's not trick or treating," I tried to say, as calmly as possible. "He's probably just screwing with us," Ben said, though without much conviction in his tone. Then something freaky happened. The clown took one slow step forward, another, turned, and started down a narrow, overgrown path leading toward the edge of town, to the woods. The trees were thick there. Shades reached out and made it impossible to see where the path went. We stopped at the entrance of the path, our hearts pounding. "I don't know about this," Sarah whispered. "We need to go back." Mike was ever bold and just shook his head. "No, I want to see where he's going. What's he up to?" It was against our better judgment, but we followed him. The narrow pathway was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves, in a wind that would seemingly reach out and touch us at random intervals. The farther away we walked, the darker it became, trees closing in around us. It just felt like the world had shrunk down to only the path ahead of us, and the clown in the distance, steadily moving into the night. As we drew closer, he veered to the left, off the trail and into a small clearing, no more than a few feet inside the woods. The moon broke through the canopy of treetops above, casting long, sinister shadows on the ground. He stopped dead center, perfectly still, in the middle of the clearing. The red balloon bobbed gently in the wind. But otherwise, he didn't move. Just stood there, staring at the ground. We all slowed down, exchanging uneasy glances. Why did we follow him? But before anyone got to answer, the clown raised one hand in slow motion and pointed to the far end of the clearing. His finger, pale under the moonlight, was pointing towards something that resembled an old gravestone, half buried amidst leaves. We hesitated, but something pulled me toward it. I approached the stone and started to wipe the leaves off. Carved into the granite face was a name. Michael Granger, 10 years old. "Wait, what?" I muttered in a weak voice. Mike, Sarah, and Ben leaned in. The color drained from their faces as they read the name. Michael Granger. The same name as Mike's younger brother who had gone missing. Exactly 5 years ago on Halloween. The search parties never found him. The police were never offered any leads. He had simply vanished into thin air. Mike stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. "It can't be," he said, his voice shaking. This can't be real." I turned back to the clown, but he was gone. Vanished, just like that, without so much as a trace. The only thing that remained was the bright red balloon. It floated to the ground slowly, then popped with one soft hiss. We stood in silent shock, not knowing what to do or say.
Was the clown? Was it trying to lead us to the truth? Was this his method of showing Mike what had happened to his brother? Or was it something darker? Something we wouldn't know? We didn't stick around to find out. Our hearts heavy, the weight of mystery bearing down upon us. We fled the woods as fast as we possibly could. But every Halloween, it is this night that fills my mind. And I wonder if the clown, or whatever he was, is still out there waiting for someone else to follow him into the darkness. A few years ago, I rented this house in what seemed like a quiet suburban neighborhood. It wasn't anything fancy, just enough space for me and my dog, Rex. Most days were uneventful work. Home, maybe a walk with Rex in the evenings. But that calm was shattered in the strangest, most unsettling way. It started when Rex began acting weird. One evening, I was watching TV, and out of nowhere, he started growling at a spot in the hallway. His ears were perked up, hackles raised, and his eyes were fixed on the ceiling. He wasn't the kind of dog that spooked easily, so I walked over to calm him down. That's when I heard it, a faint, almost imperceptible noise. It was so light that I thought it was just the house settling at first. But the noise didn't stop. It was rhythmic, almost like someone or something was moving right above us. Now, my house didn't have an attic, just a small crawl space between the ceiling and the roof. I couldn't imagine why anyone would be up there. But the sound continued. Rex wouldn't stop growling. So I decided to call the landlord. He assured me there couldn't be anyone up there, but he'd send a handyman over to check just to make sure. When the handyman arrived the next day, he was a burly, no-nonsense guy. He grabbed a flashlight and climbed up into the crawl space, not expecting to find anything. I stood below, waiting as he shuffled around up there for what felt like an eternity. And then there was silence. A long, uncomfortable silence. When he finally came back down the ladder, his face was pale, his hands trembling. "You need to call the police," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. He wouldn't tell me what he'd seen, but I didn't ask. I was already dialing. When the police arrived, they went up there and came down with something. Or rather, someone. A man. Filthy, disheveled, and wild-eyed. He'd been living in the crawl space for who knows how long. The officers said they found little holes drilled into the ceiling above my bedroom, the bathroom, even the living room. He had been watching me for weeks, maybe months. The man was arrested, and later I learned he was wanted for a string of home invasions in the area. But what haunts me most is wondering what his plan was. Was he just watching? Or was he waiting for the right moment to do something far worse? My cousin Jess has always been the adventurous type. You know, the kind of person who'd rather spend a weekend hiking through dense forests than hanging out in the city. She lived near the Blue Mountains in Australia, one of the most beautiful but wild places you could imagine. If you're not familiar with the Blue Mountains, it's this vast area of deep valleys, rugged cliffs, and dense bushland. It's the kind of place where you can disappear from the world, literally. Jess loved it. She practically grew up there, spending nearly every weekend hiking, camping, or just exploring those trails. She always said the solitude of nature was where she found peace, away from the noise and stress of life. The thing is, she often went on these hikes alone. We used to joke about it, telling her that one day she'd go so deep into the wilderness that she'd never come back. But now, when I think about those jokes, they don't feel funny anymore. It was just over a year ago when Jess set off on a 2-day trek she'd been planning for a while. She'd been talking about this one for months, mapping out the trail, getting all her gear ready. She was really excited about it. Before she left, she texted me a selfie. Typical Jess, smiling wide, her backpack on, looking like she didn't have a care in the world. She was standing at the beginning of the trail, surrounded by trees, with the mountains in the background. She looked so happy, so full of life. That was the last time I ever heard from her. She was supposed to be back in 2 days, but when she didn't show up, everyone started to worry. At first, we tried to stay calm, thinking maybe she just lost track of time, or decided to camp out an extra night. But as the hours passed, that calm turned into panic. Her phone was going straight to voicemail, and no one had heard from her. By the next morning, a full-scale search party was organized. Family, friends, local volunteers, even search and rescue teams were combing the area where she was supposed to be. They searched for days. For 5 long, agonizing days, they found nothing. Not a single clue. It was just sitting there at the edge of a steep cliff, neatly placed as if she had calmly taken it off and set it down. But there were no signs of Jess. No struggle. No footprints leading away from the bag. It was like she just vanished. The authorities thought maybe she had fallen. But the search teams rappelled down the cliff, scoured the base, even brought in helicopters. Still, nothing. No body, no trace, nothing at all. Weeks passed, then months. The search was called off, and Jess's disappearance became one of those unsolved mysteries that people in town would whisper about. Some people thought maybe she had an accident and her body just hadn't been found yet. Others had darker theories. Was she taken? Did someone do something to her and then cover it up? Or, and this one always sends chills down my spine, did she walk away? Did she choose to disappear into the wilderness? We were all left with questions and no answers. But then, almost exactly 1 year later, something happened that made Jess's disappearance even more disturbing. I was at home, just mindlessly scrolling through social media like I do most nights. I wasn't even thinking about Jess at that moment. And then, out of nowhere, a new post popped up on my feed. It was from Jess's account. At first, I froze. My heart was racing. Her account hadn't been active in a year, not since she went missing. The post was a photo. It was the cliff, the same one where they found her backpack, but the angle was different. It looked like the photo was taken from the base of the cliff, looking up. I stared at it, trying to make sense of it. Who could have taken that picture? And why were they using Jess's account? Before I could even react, the post was deleted. I clicked on her profile, but her account had been deactivated. I contacted her family, and they hadn't posted anything. No one had access to her account. No one could explain what had happened. To this day, no one has figured out who uploaded that picture or why. Jess has never been found, and that photo is the last sign of her we've ever had. Every time I go hiking now, especially when I'm near the Blue Mountains, I can't help but feel like someone is watching. It's that feeling, you know? Like when the hairs on the back of your neck stand up for no reason. I've stopped going on solo hikes. I'm too afraid. Because the thing is, the wilderness can hide things, and sometimes people disappear into it, and they never come back. Before we get into the next story, if you come for the first time, please make sure to subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for upcoming scary stories. We need your support. Please share the stories with your friends and family. There's this old curiosity shop downtown that I used to walk past on my way home from work. The shop was always packed with oddities. Antique dolls, rusted tools, taxidermy animals. But the centerpiece of the display was a life-sized mannequin in the window. It wore vintage clothing, a long dress, and an old-fashioned bonnet, and its skin was so unnervingly lifelike that people would often stop to stare. I never liked the mannequin. Something about it felt off. Its eyes seemed too real, its skin too detailed, like someone had put a little too much effort into making it. The owner of the shop, an old man who rarely spoke, would just laugh when people asked about it. He'd say it was just a mannequin, nothing more. One evening, I was walking by the shop after it had closed. The street was empty and the lights inside the shop were off. As I passed the window, I noticed something strange. The mannequin's head, it had moved. It was turned, facing me directly, its cold eyes fixed on mine. I stopped, frozen in my tracks. I told myself it was a trick of the light, that I was just imagining things. But as I took a step closer, the mannequin's head tilted again, just slightly, but enough for me to see it was no illusion. My heart raced as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet. I didn't wait to see more. I ran the rest of the way home. For days, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I avoided walking by the shop, but one afternoon, I went to see if the mannequin had moved again. But when I arrived, the shop was gone. The windows were boarded up, and a for-lease sign hung on the door. The old man had vanished without a trace. A few weeks later, I heard rumors. They said the police had found something in the back room. Human remains, perfectly preserved, dressed in vintage clothing. It wasn't a mannequin at all. A few years ago, I worked as a night security guard in this high-rise office building downtown. It was one of those older buildings with that kind of charm that comes with age, but also that unsettling quiet when you're alone at night. The place was mostly dead after hours, except for the occasional late-night worker or cleaning crew. My job, pretty simple: patrol the floors, keep an eye on things, and monitor the security cameras. Most nights were uneventful, just me and the hum of fluorescent lights. But there was this one night, I'll never forget it. It was around 2 a.m., and I was sitting in the security office, watching the cameras, trying to stay awake. You know how it is when the building's empty, and everything feels still. That kind of silence, where every little noise seems louder than it should be. I was zoning out when I noticed something weird on the camera feed. The elevator was moving. Now, that wouldn't normally be a big deal. Except this elevator was going up and down randomly, stopping at different floors, but no one was inside. At first, I thought, okay, maybe someone's playing a prank. Or maybe someone had called it but changed their mind. So I checked the logs. Nothing. No one had called the elevator. It hadn't been used in hours. I shrugged it off, thinking it must be a glitch. Happens, right? So I reset the system, but even after resetting the elevator, kept moving up and down, stopping on different floors, but still no one inside. At this point, it's weird. But I'm thinking it's probably just a technical malfunction. Maybe one of the cleaning crew members hit the wrong button or something. But the more I watched, the more it started to feel off. After a few minutes of watching this elevator act up, I decided I'd go check it out. Maybe I'd find a stuck button or something that was making it act up. So, I took the stairs up to the floor where the elevator had last stopped. When I got there, the doors were open, like it had been waiting for me. And, no surprise, it was empty. I stepped inside just to take a quick look. The second I did, the doors closed behind me. I hadn't pressed any buttons, but the elevator started moving. I figured, okay, maybe it's just on its way to the ground floor or something. But instead, it took me down. Not just to the lobby, but all the way to the basement. Now, here's the thing. The basement was off limits. You couldn't even access it without a key card, and only the building managers and maintenance had access. When the doors opened, I hesitated. The basement was dark. Way darker than I'd ever seen it. Normally, there were these dim lights always on down there, just enough to see the storage rooms and equipment. But this time, the lights were flickering, like something out of a horror movie. And the air, it was freezing cold, like someone had left the door to a freezer open. I stepped out, and as soon as I did, I started hearing this whispering sound. At first, I thought it might be the ventilation system or the wind blowing through the old pipes. But this whispering, it wasn't just some noise. It was words. But I couldn't make out what was being said. It was like the whispering was coming from all around me, echoing off the walls. But there was no one else down there. No one. My pulse started to race, and my instincts were screaming at me to get back into the elevator. But something kept pulling me further into the basement. I kept walking, trying to find the source of the whispering. I don't know why. Curiosity maybe, stupidity. It's hard to say. There were old furniture and boxes scattered everywhere, like the building had been using this space as a storage dump for years. But no matter how much I looked around, I couldn't find anything that explained the whispers. It was just empty, yet the whispering kept getting louder. It was frantic, like someone was trying to tell me something, but I couldn't understand the words. My heart was pounding, and I could feel this overwhelming sense of dread crawling up my spine. Suddenly, without warning, the elevator doors slammed shut behind me. It wasn't like a normal door closing. It was loud, almost like they were forced shut. I spun around, sprinting back to the doors and started pressing the button to open them. But nothing happened. The whispering grew louder, more aggressive. It was like 1,000 voices all talking at once, surrounding me. I felt like I was losing it. I kept slamming the button, praying for the doors to open. The whispering turned into this low hum, like something was right behind me, just waiting. Then, out of nowhere, the noise stopped. Dead silence. The only sound was my own shaky breathing. I pressed the button one last time, and to my relief, the doors finally opened. I practically threw myself inside the elevator and hit the button for the ground floor. The doors closed, and it took me back up without any issue. But let me tell you, that ride felt like the longest of my life. When the doors opened to the lobby, I didn't even look back. I grabbed my stuff, handed in my resignation the next day, and never stepped foot in that building again. I still don't know what was down there. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but I can't shake the feeling that something was in that basement, something I wasn't supposed to see. I worked the night shift at a small, roadside motel just outside of town. It was the kind of place that barely saw any traffic, especially in the dead of night. Most of the time, I was alone, sitting at the front desk, watching the clock tick by. Nothing ever happened until one night, something did. It was around 3 a.m. when the phone rang. I picked it up, and the voice on the other end asked for fresh towels to be sent to room 104. I thought it was strange because, according to my records, room 104 wasn't occupied. In fact, it hadn't been rented out in weeks. But I figured maybe I'd made a mistake or someone had switched rooms without telling me. So I grabbed some towels and headed down the hall. When I got to room 104, the door was slightly ajar. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I knocked softly, but no one answered. I pushed the door open and the room was empty. No luggage, no personal items, nothing to indicate anyone was staying there. The only thing out of place was the phone off the hook, as if someone had just made a call. The air in the room felt thick and unnerving. I put the phone back on the receiver, dropped the towels on the bed, and left as quickly as I could. As I walked back to the front desk, the phone rang again. I picked it up, and once again, it was room 104 asking for towels. My heart pounded in my chest. I hung up the phone without saying a word and locked myself in the office for the rest of the night. The next morning, I checked the security footage. No one had entered or exited room 104 all night. When I told my boss what happened, he brushed it off, saying it was probably just a glitch in the system. But glitches don't make phone calls. Karen loved Halloween. It was her favorite time of the year, especially in the small, festive town where she lived. Every Halloween, the entire neighborhood went all-out houses, decked with cobwebs, fake gravestones lining front lawns, and kids roaming the streets in search of candy. Karen always participated, decorating her home and setting out a giant candy bowl for the trick, or treaters. This year was no different. Karen's bowl was overflowing with candy, and she sat inside by the window, sipping tea and watching the parade of kids run up and grab handfuls of sweets. There was something magical about Halloween night, the way the streets came alive with costumes, laughter, and the glow of jack-o'-lanterns. As the night wore on, things started to quiet down. The younger children had gone home, and only the older kids remained, wandering the streets in small groups. It was nearing 10 p.m. when Karen heard a soft knock on her door. Surprised, she stood up and peeked through the window, but no one was there. Shrugging it off as a prank, she went back to her seat. But then, another knock came. This time, louder. Karen frowned and opened the door, expecting to see a group of teens laughing at her reaction. Instead, the porch was empty. The candy bowl, however, had been knocked over, and the candy scattered across the ground. Annoyed, she stepped outside to clean up, but that's when she noticed something strange. A small, folded piece of paper lying next to the bowl. Curious, she picked it up and unfolded it. In neat, precise handwriting, the note read, "Don't eat the candy." Her heart skipped a beat. Was this some kind of sick joke? Who would leave a note like that? She looked around, but there was no one in sight. The streets were deserted. The festive atmosphere now replaced by an eerie silence. Karen rushed inside, locking the door behind her, and called the police, explaining what had happened. They arrived quickly, searching the area and inspecting the candy. At first, everything seemed fine, just normal Halloween candy. But when the officers decided to run a test on the sweets, they made a horrifying discovery. Hidden inside several pieces were razor blades, small and sharp enough to be swallowed without being noticed until it was too late. Karen was horrified. She had been handing out candy all night. How many kids had taken the tainted sweets? The police immediately issued warnings throughout the town, urging parents to check their children's candy bags. Hospitals were put on alert, and parents rushed their kids to get examined. Several children were found with minor cuts, but thankfully, no one had swallowed the blades. As the investigation continued, more reports came in from around town. Karen wasn't the only one. Across the neighborhood, candy bowls had been sabotaged with razor blades, needles, and even small shards of glass. Whoever was behind this had planned it carefully, slipping the dangerous items into candy at multiple houses without anyone noticing. But the most disturbing part came a week later. Karen received another note. This one left on her car windshield. It simply read, "Next Halloween will be even worse." The police never caught the person responsible, and to this day, no one knows who orchestrated the Halloween sabotage. But the town has never celebrated Halloween the same way again. It was the kind of Halloween everyone looked forward to. Decorations hung on every house. Jack-o'-lanterns glowed eerily on front porches, and kids in all sorts of costumes ran from door to door, their laughter filling the air. The small suburban town had always celebrated Halloween in grand fashion, with block parties and events that brought the community together. But this year was different. Just a week before Halloween, the local news was buzzing with the story of an escaped convict. His face was flashed across every TV screen. George the Reaper Hansen, a man convicted of a string of brutal murders years ago. He'd been serving a life sentence in the maximum security prison just outside of town. How he managed to escape was still a mystery, but the authorities had warned everyone to stay vigilant. They assured the public that he was likely long gone. There was an underlying tension in the air that couldn't be shaken. Still, people decided to continue with their Halloween plans. The streets were filled with children in costumes, parents chatting, and groups of teens wandering around, pulling pranks and making the most of the spooky atmosphere. No one thought much of the man in the mask. He wore a plain white face, smooth and featureless, with hollow eyes and a stitched mouth. A mask that, in the darkness of Halloween night, looked far too realistic. His clothes were simple, just a black hoodie and dark jeans, blending in with the shadows. At first, people thought he was part of the festivities, maybe even a hired actor for one of the haunted house setups. The first to notice something off were the parents. As they ushered their kids from house to house, they noticed the man in the mask standing at the far end of the street, always watching. He never moved, never approached, but his presence was unnerving. Some brushed it off as a Halloween prank. Others were too busy enjoying the night to care. But as the night wore on, more people began to take notice. The man would disappear for a while only to reappear on another street corner or at the edge of someone's yard. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't even trick or treat. He was just there, always watching, his featureless mask gleaming under the flickering streetlights. Around midnight, the crowd thinned. The younger kids had gone home, their bags full of candy, and only a few groups of older teens remained hanging out and causing harmless trouble. That's when it happened. In one of the quiet streets, a group of teens were sitting on the porch of an old abandoned house, one that was rumored to be haunted. They were laughing, drinking sodas, and telling ghost stories when they noticed the man in the mask standing at the end of the driveway. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, watching. At first, they thought it was funny. "Nice costume, dude." One of them shouted, but the man remained silent. After a few minutes, the laughter died down, replaced by an uneasy feeling that something wasn't right. The man's stillness, the coldness of the mask, it was starting to feel less like a prank and more like something dangerous. One of the teens, Alex, decided to confront him. "What's your deal, man?" He called out, walking toward the figure. The others stayed behind. Watching, Alex got closer, but the man didn't react. "You hear me?" Alex said, now just a few feet away. Then, without warning, the man lunged. The attack was swift and brutal, catching Alex off guard. He hit the ground hard, blood spilling from a deep cut across his chest. His friend screamed, frozen in terror, as the man stood over Alex's body. His mask still expressionless, his eyes cold and empty. Before they could react, he disappeared into the night, vanishing into the shadows as though he was never there. They called the police, their voices frantic, but by the time the authorities arrived, the man was gone, leaving only Alex's lifeless body behind. The investigation that followed uncovered a horrifying truth. The mask had been a signature of George the Reaper Hansen, the very convict who had escaped just a week earlier. He had been hiding in plain sight, using Halloween as a cover for his final kill, a twisted game he had planned all along. And as the police searched the town, they found the mask discarded in a nearby alleyway. But Hansen himself was never caught. To this day, some say he's still out there, waiting for the next Halloween.